masculine. But I don't want that to be something that can be a potential like dysphoria trigger, because a lot of things you can use, less is more. Less makeup you wear, the more effective it's going to look, especially if you're trying to pass specifically as more mask. The prominent features that you're going to want to define specifically are going to be the brow ridge area, your jawline and cheekbones. Oftentimes people will contour their nose as well if they have a more delicate, a more perceptually feminine nose. They might widen it a little bit. And the space right here called the philtrum, the space between your nose and your upper lip, that tends to be spaced out a little bit further. So a lot of times you might want to shorten, or excuse me, extend the distance here artificially with cosmetics as well. Another thing too, especially for a lot of people who are on T, for example, might start growing a bit of facial hair. I naturally kind of grow a bit of facial hair due to PCOS. So even though this is my bare side, you can kind of see a little bit of like a shadow. But with makeup, you can actually accentuate that. If the word makeup can kind of make you feel a little bit dysphoric, think of it more as male grooming. Even if you were a cis male, for example, and you still wanted to use cosmetics, a lot of time that just goes into grooming, specifically like the beard grooming or your eyebrows, etc. You're not going to want to look out and go in public necessarily with like a full beat like a newscaster might, even though if they were cis, they might. This is more for everyday passing. Drag king makeup is really fun to do, but in an average scenario going out on public, it's very detectable makeup. Today's lesson is going to be more on less detectable cosmetics, and specifically more like passing friendly makeup, and more sensory and dysphoria friendly makeup as well. You guys can all hear me pretty well, I'm hoping. Let me know, give me any feedback in the chat as well. I know anyone watching on Twitch or YouTube is probably not going to be able to see our chat. I'm specifically, any feedback that I'm giving for this lesson is going to be based off of feedback that I am seeing right now in Discord. So just a disclaimer. All right. Awesome. Thank you guys. So I tend to start, especially for more masculinizing features, specifically with the eyebrow. Skincare is definitely important as well. I've already put on a slightly color correcting sunscreen. This one I really like. It's from Innisfree. It just has a little bit of like a green tint to it, even though it's a sunscreen. Sunscreen is definitely something really important you want to invest in, regardless of your gender, simply because it is going to be the #1 way to combat signs of aging, as well as finding things like skin cancer, of course, that you want to be preventing as well. So I've already kind of put that on my skin. Now, because we're masculinizing, less is definitely going to be more. I'm not going to be wearing foundation. I'm not going to be using concealer. I'm not going to be doing any of that right now. That being said, a lot of people who are on T tend to get little breakouts here and there. So you may feel a little bit more confident if you cover those. If not, it's not that big of a deal. Letting it peek through, in my opinion, can kind of give you a more natural vibe, and it's less artificial, less manufactured, which is perceived by a lot of people to be a bit more natural as well. So let's get started with brows. Now, a good brow gel is definitely going to come in handy specifically. Let me zoom in here. So you can see how I've already done this brow, even though I shave my eyebrows off. I've taken a brow gel and essentially combed these hairs downwards and kind of cemented them in place. Because in masculinizing features, you are going to want to make the brow bone seem heavier and more prominent. So this brow bone right here, we're going to want to accentuate that. So we're essentially doing the opposite of what we did in our feminizing makeup here. So combing the hairs down, will lower the brow bone a bit. Now, if you are blessed with naturally bushy eyebrows, oftentimes that is all you really have to do in that department. A tinted eyebrow gel, for example, this one even has like eyebrow like fibers in it as well, to kind of thicken that area. Can definitely help a lot as well, just to kind of fill in any sparse zones. I also highly, highly recommend, especially if you are like me and not necessarily as blessed in the eyebrows department, something like an eyebrow pencil. Um, this one is really cool. It's from Urban Decay. I know I'm a little biased having worked for them in the past, but I do have a lot of Urban Decay products that I can recommend. This one is really cool because it has a pencil on one side that you can fill in, and then on the other side, it actually has an eyebrow pen and it's a stain. And it is specifically designed to go onto bare skin, which is very, very nice for people who don't like to wear a lot of makeup and just want something that's going to stain, not be detectable, not going to sweat off, and be waterproof. So, that being said, let's start filling him in. Let me get that to focus. There we go. Now, you don't have to be precise with this. You want a deliberately messy effect because typically more masculine brows tend to be more unkempt, less precise, more boxy. Feminine features, if you remember from the last class, tend to be more rounded. Your eyebrow would be more rounded versus being boxy. So we're going to try and make this one more boxy. Now, another really cool thing you can do with eyebrow gel, especially if it is tinted, is you can actually use it to accentuate sideburns, which are definitely perceived as a more masculine feature. And if you have facial hair, especially if you've started on T already, you're going to have natural facial hair right here that you can kind of sweep it up with. So I know a lot of people in the community already know about like the mascara trick, but this is honestly even more natural looking if it is already close to your natural eyebrow color or your root color. Just going to match whatever your roots are because this color is going to be the same as this color. I do really like the pen because it gives it more dimension as well. And the technique that I'm using to do this is very light hand. I'm using a very, very light hand. And as I'm stroking upwards, I'm lifting up to create natural hairs. Now, you also want to extend this inwards more as well. On a typical feminizing look, this is going to line up here and end about here. Now, more hair is going to grow in between here, but it's not usually as detectable because people who tend to be more feminine tend to remove hair from this area. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go and give yourself a unibrow or anything like that, even though that can also be a look, but you're just going to bring it in a little closer here, just to make this area seem that much heavier and more prominent as a brow bone. A lot of times you want to use a spoolie as well. That's what this is called, this kind of almost like a pipe cleaner. Definitely a great tool for your arsenal. And what that's going to do is it's going to help blend out your pencil marks. You can also use a pomade as well. In my trans femme video, I used a pomade to do my brows. I'm just changing it up a little bit just to show people a little bit more variety and how they can achieve different effects. Using an eyebrow pen again, but in a slightly darker color just to create even more hair strokes that look natural. Now, if you're trying to do more of a drag king aesthetic, your eyebrows would definitely be more angular and darker as well. But for the sake of passing, you want your eyebrows to definitely look a bit softer and a little bit more unkempt, which is why I'm adding individual hair strokes in a bunch of different directions as well. So you can see it a little bit better here. Bunch of different, even though it's all artificial, it's a bunch of different hair strokes that I've melted into my natural, where my hair actually grows on my eyebrows. And we're just going to do the same thing on this side. Sorry if that's a little out of focus. There we go. Another reason I like to do the eyebrows first is for the same reason that I mentioned in the trans femme video, which is that if you make a mistake, it's very easy to fix. Especially if you're playing around with your bone structure or the way things naturally grow. Sometimes they can kind of be a little in the way sometimes. You're tending to stay away from any harsh lines. So a lot of this is individual hair strokes to prevent a harsh edge, which is going to look a little too harsh. It can kind of age you a little bit as well, regardless of whether you're trying to do more feminizing or more masculinizing looks. I also want to mention that you don't have to be trans mask or non-conforming to watch this video. Anyone who is trans femme watching this video, I think it is very important, especially depending in situations where you really don't feel safe or you're closeted, you live with your family and they don't know that you're transitioning, and you've already started taking hormones, for example, that you want to, when you're visiting them and things like that, to pass more as what you were before when you were obviously not out to them. So a lot of times you might want to do an artificial like boy mode or girl mode to for your own safety in a lot of instances. So even though you might identify as more femme, sometimes using masculinizing makeup can be very helpful and assisting you to protect yourself. So think of this also as self-defense for passing as well. So that eyebrow is done. You'll notice it's a little bit different in color, and that's simply because I haven't powdered it. I like to powder it to make it even softer, and also simply because of the fact that I do shave my eyebrows off to draw them in different ways, obviously. It's going to look shinier there, and it can kind of take away from the fact that I'm trying to make it seem more three-dimensional. So by powdering over it, that takes away the shine. And you don't even have to use like a cosmetics powder. You can even use just something like baby powder. You don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of expensive products. Just a tiny bit of powder to take away the shine. Now, another important thing, like I said, I'm not going to be putting on foundation or concealer for this, but something like a contour is going to be extremely helpful into kind of chiseling out your facial features a bit more, especially if you're trying to be a little bit more masculinizing. Let me zoom out a little bit. Now, one of the most prominent dark spots in more masculine features tends to be this area right here. Again, because of the prominence of the brow bone, we're trying to make this area darker. Remember in the trans femme video, we wanted this area to become brighter and lighter in order to make the brow bone seem less forward. So we're doing the opposite for this. The nice thing about a cream contour stick too, by the way, is if you find using brushes or like beauty tools, things like that to be dysphoria inducing, you can literally just rub it in with your fingers, like war paint. And just melts right into your skin. So I'm putting it right here in a C shape and then down and blending it in with my fingers. This one is from Fenty. I really like the Fenty ones because it is minimalistic packaging. It is not super gendered. It also has really good consistency and it is a cool tone. A lot of times I see a lot of trans dudes when they are starting out. A lot of times it can look very orange when they start contouring. This is more cool tone, which is going to look more like a shadow, a natural shadow. So by cool toned, I mean almost more of a grayish versus a brown, if that makes sense. If you have warm toned skin, you're still going to, or even if you have like a darker complexion, I do still recommend Fenty because they have a very, very, very accommodating range of shades that are going to be more cool toned, regardless of whether, like, my skin is more neutral. I am Hispanic, so I tend to veer more in the olive direction, which has like a greenish undertone to the skin, but also kind of like a yellowish green underneath the skin. But if you have a warmer skin tone, you would probably go for a darker color, but you don't want it to make you look ashy. So a little bit of warmth tends to be added to the darker shade, specifically with like the Fenty line, for example. More affordable, by the way, I do highly recommend the brand NYX, spelled NYX. They actually have a complexion like duo. It's like a 2-in-1. So it actually has like the contouring on one side and then a highlighting stick on the other side, which is really helpful because then you can actually use the lighter shade to pull out the facial features that you want to become more prominent, and it's just one tool. I just like the formula and the staying power of this specifically. And the fact that it's matte, it doesn't have any shimmer in it. A lot of times if you use like a powder bronzer, they tend to have a little bit of like a shimmer to them to give you that like summer glow. But when you're trying to do a more masculinized effect, you tend to be, unless you're trying to be Edward Cullen, you don't really want a lot of shimmer. So matte is definitely the way to go. NYX, correct. Because something like this is going to be in like the $30 range. The NYX one's probably going to be like 12 bucks. Definitely more accessible. It does depend on what country you're in, but I do, like I said, recommend cream contour sticks. Another high-end brand, Anastasia, makes really nice ones too. Um, Once you're doing this part too, you can kind of flick it in a little bit because the brow bone becomes a little bit more prominent again when you do that. So C shape right here, and then I'm kind of just extending it right across the bridge of my nose to make my forehead a little bit heavier. Blending it out so it doesn't look like a unibrow. Now, another thing, for me specifically, I'm interested in masculinizing my face by um, making my nose look a little bit more like my father's, which is a little bit wider. A lot of times, looking at um, male members of your family and noticing their features, especially because you're going to see those features in yourself if you are blood related, can kind of help you to visualize what you're going to go for a little bit more. So by looking at a picture of my dad, I can see my face in him, but I'm seeing a masculinized version of myself. And by widening or artificially widening my nose with a little bit of a shadow, really helps to be very passable for sure. A lot of people will make their nose look really small or more cutesy, and they'll do like a little stripe across the nose to give it more of a button nose effect as well. That's great for feminizing, but we're not going to do that if we're trying to masculinize. If anything, we're almost making our nose more angular. Again, feminine features, round, softer. Masculine features, angular, more like a sculpture. Essentially, we're sculpting. We are literally sculpting our own face right now. Yeah, you can definitely use straight lines for sure. If anything, actually, when I go into carving this area out, I literally just go like with straight line pretty much across and then down. We'll get to that in a second though. Now, if you have under eye circles and you want to cover them up, you can, but frankly, I find that almost giving yourself like a little bit of a tired aesthetic can actually sell a more masculinized effect as well, especially because this area in general is going to recede more because of the heavier aspect of the brow bone. Ironically, though, by adding a little bit of that contour here under the eye, almost accentuating the eye bag, it actually kind of color corrects because of the little bit of an orangey or a peachy tone in it. So it helps me to look a little less gray under my eye in a strange way. But it also does not look detectable like I'm wearing cosmetics either. But it is pushing these features back more. So, ironically, even though I am trying to be more masculine in my features right now, it kind of color corrected that a little bit in a aesthetically pleasing way that does not come across as feminizing. Now, you can kind of see my natural cheekbone here goes down and around here. So, one big C shape from the top of my ear down. And if I were doing feminizing makeup, I would want to accentuate that and make this cheekbone pop more. Oh, if you don't have dark circles, you don't have to draw them, but it is something you might want to experiment with a little bit with like your contour stick when you're going carving into this area. You can try and drag a tiny bit down just to see how that looks on yourself. If it's not working for you, you don't have to do it. This is beauty and masculinity and femininity are all going to be very subjective. Anything that I'm saying regarding feminizing or masculinizing are based off of Western beauty standards and not necessarily off of what you define that to be for yourself, because that is going to be different for every single person. Everyone's going to have different beauty standards for themselves. Exactly. This tutorial is more specifically for passing as more masculine. So sometimes a really cool thing you can do, especially with trying to find your cheek contour, is to kind of see, not everyone has dimples. I actually only have a dimple on this side, right here. It doesn't really happen right here on this side. Kind of like Mario Lopez. He only has one dimple too, which is kind of funny. But by finding that dimple right here, that's a good point for like a stopping point for when you change to draw downward. So drawing in and then downward. We're making a triangle instead of a C shape. If you have to leave right now, don't worry. We're going to archive this video and you can always pull it up a little bit later. Stay tuned. We'll definitely probably post about it as well. If you keep your notifications on, or if you follow the Trans Academy Twitch or YouTube page, they should show up for you. It might be a day or two, but we'll see. I will definitely, once I notice that they are uploaded, I'll put a link to them in the Makeup with Sara group as well, to where it's a little bit more accessible in case you missed it in the notices or anything like that. Now, I'm doing this more dramatically just to where you can see it on camera. If you want, this is optional. This is just my personal aesthetic. Looking at other male figures in my family, some of them do have a bit of a dent here that is very natural looking. So by adding a tiny bit of a contour here as well, and then here, to really make that chin pop more, is definitely going to be something more masculinizing as well. I also have pretty round cheeks, but my cheekbones are a little bit more prominent. Again, if you're looking at your face here, despite how round my facial features tend to be, despite me sculpting them to look a little bit more angular, use the top of your ear as a good reference point, especially if your face is more round. Your chin is still should be a little bit more prominent too, so you should be able to notice that. And then here, you have 3 points. Top of your ear, edge of your jawbone, and then your chin, as well as the corner of your mouth. You want to look forward to see where these points are, and not just from the side, because when your facial features are rounder, a lot of times it can be hard to see the edge of the jawline here. So, rounder facial features, you're going to contour the jawline out more. And even though my jaw ends here, I'm over drawing it to make it less round. That looks crazy right now, but I promise it's going to look a lot better once we have it all blended out. Now, a lot of times if your face is a little rounder as well, you can have a bit of extra skin, or even, like in my case, I have a little extra double chin right here as well. You can also contour that away a bit as well. There is also a muscle here that goes from here to your collarbone called the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And if you see how I'm right here, this muscle right here, it helps you to turn your head. Now, in someone who is more masculine, that tends to be more prominent. So you can also push that down if you have rounder or more full features to really accentuate that as well to make your features seem a little bit less rounded out as well. And that also leads into if you wanted to contour a bit of a Adam's apple as well. Now, again, this looks crazy right now. We haven't blended it out. Blending things out are going to make it a lot more subtle. The more you blend it out, the more it's going to pass in day-to-day life, especially as not looking or being clocked as being cosmetics. You can use a brush as well or a sponge to blend these out too. But that softness and roundness is already going away. This is what it looks like all blended out. So the shading is not super weird looking from the side. So this side has already been sculpted and blended out. The more you do little circles, the more it's going to blend it out. The more you stipple it, or stippling is basically you're tapping it in. That's going to give you less blending and fuller coverage of what that product is, whether it's foundation or bronzer or anything like that. No, when you're doing this, I just kind of threw it in there real fast, but when you're doing this, when you're talking, you should naturally be able to kind of see where your Adam's apple is bobbing from as well and feel where it's your hyoid bone. That is specifically what is more prominent. Now, if you have a fuller build like myself, it's going to be a little less detectable. In people who are assigned female at birth, who tend to have a little bit more skinny features, they tend to be a little bit more prominent here. So a lot of times, if you have a sleeker build, you might not necessarily even need to contour that area because it'll already stick out more, but you can always contour it to make it more prominent and more noticeable, especially to affirm your gender. Now, the nice thing about not having foundation on underneath all of this is if you put too much product or you blended it out too much or anything like that, it's really easy to go back in, wipe some of it off, and redo it a little bit. I do recommend bringing product down on your neck too, because a lot of times when you're doing facial contouring and you neglect the neck area, especially when you're trying to pass as more masculine, you tend to have a shorter hairstyle and this area is more exposed and more noticeable. You're going to want to have a little bit of product down here to match and kind of tie everything together into your facial features as well. If you overblend, it can soften things a little too much and it'll create that rounded effect again. So in a second here, I'm going to show you how to fix that. So I'm deliberately overblending it just to show you how to fix that, especially if you're like following along doing this too. So you can either take like a makeup wipe, or If you want, you can go in with like a cream highlight. Again, like I said, the NYX or NYX brand, um, their contouring stick has the contour on one side and then the highlight on the other. I just have two separate products to do that for. Again, that's just personal preference. In order to, for example, I over blended this jawline here so it looks rounded. We're going to chisel that back out. More like that. So, I know, like you're saying, a lot of cream highlighting products tend to have shimmer in them. I actually like using, this is literally just a tinted moisturizer stick. So it does not look like foundation. It does not have shimmer. It does not look like glitter. If I zoom in intensely on my skin, like my jawline and everything else here, you can't tell at all. It looks just like skin. Again, I don't have any filters or anything like that. This is just a raw video. Anastasia makes a lot of really nice ones that are flesh toned, that are not shimmery. Um, I also really like the brand Alia or Fenty for those as well. You can also find brands like Makeup Revolution makes some as well. Those ones are going to be really drugstore affordable too. So that this jaw is popping out. That's why I've just blended it in with my finger. If you have drier skin, I do recommend moisturizing, especially beforehand. A lot of times, ingredients like hyaluronic acid are going to pull water from the atmosphere into your skin, kind of like literally forcing your skin to drink water throughout the day. It binds water to it and pulls it into your skin. Um, Thicker, creamier products, especially ones that have like botanicals in them or ceramides in them as well, tend to also intensely hydrate and moisturize the skin. And I also find that when you go to put cosmetic products over the top of them, they also blend out very nicely. I personally, for myself, I am really oily right here and I get really dry on the outer perimeter of my face. I am also using tretinoin right now, which is a retinol, and that can make your skin really flaky. So, in order to combat that, I make sure that I deeply hydrate my skin. Even though I'm oily in the center of my face, I still want to make sure that I'm intensely hydrating my skin. This makeup should be very sensory friendly as well. It does not feel like I have anything on my skin. The only thing that's giving me a little bit of a sensory ick right now is the sunscreen. And that's just because sunscreen always just gives me that ick factor. So finding a sunscreen that does not do that for you would probably be key. But products like this they do not feel detectable at all on the skin. The only other thing that might not be as sensory friendly is brow gel sometimes. Finding a good brow gel, personally, I really like the Anastasia ones or the Benefit ones because you can't feel them on the skin. But if you were to use like a glue stick or something like that to put your eyebrows down, or a thicker product, like the Anastasia Brow Freeze, for example, to keep your eyebrows kind of locked down, sometimes those can be not as sensory friendly, especially if you don't like those like sticky feelings or anything like that. But these, since they're a cream and they blend really nicely, like even just pushing it on the skin, you can rub it in and it does not feel, you can't feel it at all. Frankly, it's definitely moisturizers and sunscreens, finding a good balance. I recommend going into a store just to find products that moisturize without being too sticky, trying them out in store on your hand, for example, and seeing how it feels walking around, even leaving the store and coming back and seeing how well it feels on your skin, if it gives you the ick or not. That's a really easy way to determine what would be good for you. And I do recommend that. For right now, I'm accentuating or contouring the jaw to be more prominent and forward, and blending it to where it matches this side. I do find that a lot of, frankly, if you're American like myself, the FDA sunscreens are way behind on compared to Australian, Asian, and European sunscreens. Um, so I often do recommend finding a foreign brand for sunscreen. They tend to be a lot more sensory friendly, not smell like American sunscreens either, and they tend to be a lot gentler on the skin. Especially if you do get oilier, they tend to be oil absorbing or blurring. And you can also find ones that are really, really hydrating as well, that are really nice that you can't feel on the skin. For especially people who have a lot of sensory issues. I tend to have a lot of ick for a lot of sensory things when it comes to creams and cosmetics like that. Um, but for specifically the products I'm using, these ones do not give me any sensory issues. Now, another cool thing you can do is if you feel like this is still, I know I'm doing it more dramatically so you can see it on camera, but if you have features, like for example, you wanted to make your chin dimple a little more prominent, you can actually use a brown eyeliner. This just happens to be Sephora brand because it's waterproof, especially if you're in a humid environment and you don't want to sweat off or risk your cosmetics being more detectable. And all I'm doing is, since this is like a creamy texture, is gently tapping and blending it in. You can also do that if you wanted to intensify, say, this right here, right there, for example. And then you can also take your finger and blend that out too. And that's already created a natural shadow that meets my brow and my nose bridge. Now, if you're interested in kind of masculinizing this area too, a lot of times people can do a tiny bit of like an eyebrow pencil or an eyeliner here and blend it out to help the brow bone be perceived as more masculine as well. Very subtle. You don't want to do too much, or it can look a little bit too drag king-ish. And that is a great and fun medium, but we're doing this for the sake of passability or even kind of like stealth mode. I do not want to be perceived. Another thing you can do too is, especially the forehead. I have a naturally larger forehead, but this area here and right here, so we want this to go away. And then drawing a line here and here to increase the shadow there. And you can even highlight a tiny bit here to make this brow bone more prominent and forward as well. And again, you can use your finger, sponge, brush, whatever you feel comfortable with. We're just blending that in, and that also helps to make the face more angular. Now, a cool thing to help you perceive your natural facial features and where these are is extreme lighting. Like what I have right now, these lightings are very intense, so I can kind of see the natural reflections, like right here, this line right here, where this area is more prominent here on my brow bone structure, and how this naturally kind of recedes a bit, which is what I'm replicating on this side. And it almost seems like for my natural structure here and right here recede, and a tiny bit right here in this line to make this area a little more blocky. And then I'm literally blending this into my hairline. If you have your head shaved or an undercut, this will still blend in quite nicely into it. Just make sure that you blend it. I also like to go a little bit up here too. But now this is receded, and here are highlighted, which, especially when I zoom out, which is how this is how you would perceive me if I was talking to you face to face. It's a lot more subdued, natural. Again, I am doing things a little dramatic for the sake of video to where it translates, but this is going to be much more realistic in real life. Now, I'm also going to put a little bit of that tinted moisturizer on my upper lip here, just to artificially extend the distance here. Not that obviously cis dudes have like full lips too, but again, the distance between the nose and the upper lip tends to be longer than in feminine features. But another reason I'm doing this is because with facial hair tends to grow here. Obviously, if you let it grow long, it can cover your lip. But in order to create the illusion of facial hair that is more natural, having a little bit of a line between your lip and the facial hair, especially if you're doing more of a 5 o'clock shadow effect, having a little bit of brightness right here helps to make that more convincing. And then also this Cupid's bow area, we're going to want to make that a little more prominent there. And in order to make my nose seem a little shorter and this area seem longer, I sometimes put a little bit of that contour here too. I feel like trans mask makeup is definitely overlooked in the community because even in doing more research for this course, because I want to be informed if there's any new techniques that, you know, in my years of doing makeup have revolutionized or changed the game. There's a distinct lack of information out there, which is really sad. So definitely making this video, especially for people who want to pass and not be a drag king. While that is fun, like I said, we're doing this to pass. So definitely, definitely trying to fill that gap here with this. Put it all in one video, make it super easy for y'all. Because there's definitely not a one size fits all on how to be masked. This is also a good stepping stone for if you want to masculinize your facial features, but you still want to experiment with makeup and be non-conforming. This is a good base to have, and then you could do like a really cool like smoky eye on top of this or something. You know what I mean? Like this is a good stepping stone and a good base to play with your features a lot more. So again, brows, most important, really. Brow bone, really. Contouring. And then if you want to affirm, like maybe if you have facial hair growing or you feel like it's patchy or it's too blonde, like my facial hair tends to grow in pretty blonde, you can take a sponge like this. This is a drag king technique, but I'm going to modify it to make it look a lot more subdued and natural. I have not shaved my facial features. So the cool thing about this is even if you just have peach fuzz, getting a stippling sponge and a gray tone. I'm kind of mixing a gray tone here. And then any facial hair that I kind of naturally have, this is going to get picked up on. I'm doing a very, very light hand here. Because you don't want it to look like you were a chimney sweeper or something, you know? Which I see can, if you do it too much. So this is almost like a mascara, but without the harshness of using a black mascara to accentuate your natural facial hair. And it can be very affirming, especially because it's like, oh my God, I have facial hair. Look, I can see it. Now, again, you don't have to have facial hair to be masked either. Like, I could have easily just left myself looking more clean shaven. But even though I am clean shaven, I don't have really like too much hair going on. This is kind of artificially creating a 5 o'clock shadow without it looking dirty. And if you over applied it a little bit, you can take a clean side that you didn't put anything on and kind of stamp it onto there too to kind of remove any product too. Take a little contour right there too, just to make the chin seem more rounded. Blending it here too. For masculine lips, I've pretty much just only added a tiny bit of like a flesh toned stick, like a tinted moisturizer stick around this area. You can even just take your finger and lightly dab it. And then you can just throw on some chapstick. If your lips are a little darker, um, you can honestly just take a beauty blender sponge like this, for example, and block the whole lip. This is actually what I do for cosplay. Do that, block it, immediately blocked out a lot of that pink tone. You don't want to do full-on concealer lips because it can make your lips look really dry. But a cool thing you could do is you could take maybe another eyeshadow or a blush even, and just gently, kind of like when you're doing, I know a lot of people cosplay, um, but you're just taking a little bit of a blush color right here. Especially if you don't want to wear it. So lipstick is definitely very textured, very detectable. Um, can definitely be dysphoria inducing as well. So kind of blocking that whole area out and then just maybe taking some chapstick and rubbing it in a little extra right here can kind of help give you that same effect if you don't want to go out and purchase like a blush, for example. Even taking a little bit of Aquaphor or a Vaseline on like a Q-tip or something, and just kind of blending them together. So this area out here, the outside of the circle, light, and then gradient into darker on the inside here. You can even take like eyeshadows, for example, and blend that into the lip area as well. Upper lip, definitely want to contour the philtrum. So this area right here, making it darker, and then the outer lip area being lighter. And then that way your facial hair is a little bit more detectable as well. It definitely gives it more of a natural, like 4 o'clock shadow vibe. And then using like the brow gel again, kind of going upwards into your hair. Kind of a little too much right there. If you want as well, a cool tip, this is something that you learn in like art school or animation, is for male features, you almost want to drag the eye area right here down, right here. Because if you are like, for example, like most cis men tend to have really long full eyelashes, which is kind of funny because you'd think that it would be the other way around, that someone like a cis woman would have really long eyelashes, but really, like, it's kind of reverse in a weird way. But I'm just lowering the eye a little bit and making it recede a little bit too. And I'm just using my finger, the natural heat from my finger, to blend it out because I don't want it to look like I did a smoky eye or something. And also, you can kind of push it into your waterline, upper waterline. This is a dark brown. to make the eyes look a little bit smaller as well. And also make the lashes still look thicker and fuller in a masculine way without having to apply mascara. No, for real. Like, I'll see a cis man, and I'm just like, why can't I have your eyelashes? How? It's not fair. I want that. Instead, I am stuck with my sad lashes. If you want as well, to define your facial hair or anything like that, you can also take like the eyebrow pen and kind of individually draw little hairs, kind of like we did on the brows too. I'm doing this very, 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 very lightly, barely touching my skin because I do not want it to be detectable. If anything, this pen that I have is lighter than my natural hair color to be less detectable because I don't want to be perceived as wearing makeup. Kind of leave it there if you wanted to, but I want to accentuate Adam's apple a little bit more. Another thing too, that I did a little bit over here too, that I'm about to do on this side, is take a tiny, tiny bit of that contour shade and use a brush to kind of stipple it on here too. Just to make that jawline pop even more. If you want to, you can also add a tiny bit right here and right here. To pull this area, make it more pointy, more prominent as well. Another cool thing you can do is, again, you can take a big powder brush like this. I don't even really have that much product on it, but I'm just going to stipple it over my whole face to get rid of any shininess because I don't want to look like I'm sweating, but I also don't want to look like I have a whole bunch of skincare on my face either. Doesn't have any shimmer, doesn't have anything in it, but it's just getting rid of a tiny bit of that shine for me. I want to accentuate my sideburns too, so I'm going to do a tiny bit of that beard stubble color, that grayish tone, into here. Now, I've cut my hair to give me sideburns here, but you don't have to do that, especially if you are in an unsafe situation where you feel like it might be clockable for you to be like, oh my God, like you're one of them, you know? Like we want to make this subtle. So if you wanted to do this without having to make the commitment of having to cut your hair a certain way, you can use that with makeup as well. The same way that I did the stubble here. Now you also want to look at your facial features from pretty much every angle to make sure that it isn't too obvious from the side. Because a lot of what we're contouring, we're making this seem more prominent here. A lot of that is for the sake of when people are looking directly at you, but you don't want to be perceived as wearing cosmetics from the side. So make sure that it's still blended out enough. Right. Now from there, you can style your hair however you want. I tend to do um, the cosmetic aspect first and then hair afterwards in case you have like hair products, especially if you have sensory issues or find the hairspray to be sticky, things like that. I just used a little bit of a pomade to shove my hair back. Obviously, I have longer hair, so I've just pinned it back, but then kind of just pompadoured it a little bit. You can throw on a hat if you want, if that makes you feel a little bit better about yourself too. Especially hiding the fact that you might have long hair, for example, if you're more non-conforming, but you just want to be perceived as more masculine because that's how you feel that day as well. So I don't want to have to sacrifice my long hair. So I've just styled it in a way that I'm still able to feel mask, look mask, but tomorrow when I go to do my makeup, if I want to be femme, I can too. But that depends on what you're doing. I'm comfortable leaving the way I look right now, um, where it is. But I want to open up to you guys if there's anything you want to talk about specifically, or if you have any specific concerns. I wanted this class to be about an hour of doing the actual application, and then the last 30 minutes to be like Q&A and discussion. Actually, Oh, yes, okay. So upper lip definitely seems to be a huge, point for masculinizing, for sure. So this part right here, is called the philtrum. So it is the distance between your nose and your upper lip. Now, in faces that are perceived as masculine in most societies, this distance is further apart or longer in masculine features than it is in feminine features. So, in order to increase the distance between the nose and the lip, I've taken a this something exactly my skin color, but very subdued, very light. I don't want it to look like I have any kind of products on my skin, and blended it onto that upper lip to make my upper lip slightly smaller. A lot of tutorials, you're going to see people making their lips look fuller. But for me personally, if I'm trying to be more mask, I want my upper lip actually to look smaller. And my lower lip can still look bigger. I can even accentuate my upper lip, or excuse me, my lower lip if I wanted to, in the process of making my chin look more prominent. Because by adding a little bit of a shadow here, this seems brighter and fuller, but so does this area, your lower lip, excuse me. Again, a sponge like this, you want to take a look at this, very textured. And then if I go to apply that to something that doesn't even have hair, it creates almost a subdued freckle effect. And if you do it with a blue enough tone or a gray enough tone, it can very easily create the illusion of facial hair, like here, by only settling where you do have pores, for example. So you're just stippling it right there. And then if you overdo it a little bit, just make sure that you almost line your lips with that light color. Or if you're not a fan of that, if wearing skin products like that make you feel dysphoric, or if it's like a sensory issue, you can just remove any of that gray tone from that area just by using a makeup wipe or your finger. Then that gives you that texture on the skin. That's super zoomed in, sorry. It's only really settled on wherever I had those little tiny blonde hairs on my hand. If you're non-binary, honestly, you don't really have to feel the need for facial hair. Or even if you're like trans mask, you don't really need facial hair. A lot of guys just go around pretty clean shaven as well. So please don't feel obligated to do facial hair. That is definitely one of the harder things to pull off and have look natural in specifically doing masculinizing makeup, which is why I tend to recommend using your natural facial hair by using like a brow mascara. If your hair is a little darker, you can use a regular mascara as well, and just doing upward motions back and forth, zigzagging a little bit, very lightly and without touching the skin, so it only catches on your natural facial hair. So that's an easy way to do that as well. It just takes a little bit of practice to get the pressure right. Make sure you're doing enough pressure to affect the hairs, but you don't want it to be scraping onto your skin either, because that looks obviously very artificial. But regardless of whether you want to be more clean shaven or look like you have a little bit of facial hair, I wanted to demonstrate an effective way to do that if that is something that you're interested in. If you are not interested in doing facial hair, I would do everything that I've done with regard to the contouring, natural contouring, and making your facial structure more angular, your brow bone more prominent, your nose a little bit wider, and droop your eyes down a little bit more, make this area darker right here in general. And then make your chin a little more prominent just by highlighting here a little bit. Those are good ways to do that without having to do facial hair. Facial hair is definitely very fun, especially if you have been on T for a while and you actually have a lot of natural, like homegrown hair on your face too, because it's easily natural contouring for men in a lot of ways. The way that your beard is grown and shaped affects your jaw structure and the way it's perceived. So definitely it can age you, make you look a little bit more mature, a little bit more masculine, um, less of a hey buddy and more of a hey dude, you know? That's definitely a struggle for sure. Is people like still maybe perceiving you as masculine, but still infantilizing you, which is not cool. So definitely adding at least a little bit of shadow, which is all I've really done, a tiny bit of a shadow. Um, I'm 30 and I feel like I don't, even though I tend to be perceived as younger than I am, even though I'm in my 30s, um, adding a little bit of facial hair kind of ages me up a little bit, whether, because otherwise I feel like feminine facial features like my own tend to be perceived as more like plumper, more full, more round. So by angling all of that out, it helps me to pass more masculine, but it's also going to help to make me seem a little bit less baby faced as well. Again, though, a lot of that's just going to come down to practice. By the way, these sponges, they're super cheap. You can literally get them at like the drugstore or like Sally's Beauty or even Amazon for like a couple of bucks. When Halloween comes around, I actually use these a lot in special effects for blood effects or even freckles as well. Um, yeah, special effects makeup definitely comes in handy when it comes to artificially creating features that you might not necessarily notice are there in yourself. You're just bringing them out. You're carving them out from your homegrown structures that you have. Spoolies, you can kind of get a similar effect with like the spoolies too, but I find that they are less like these are very random, a little bit more authentic. This can look a little too artificial in kind of pushing a product around on your face to create facial hair, even in your eyebrows sometimes. Um, even cutting little, like this is a big sponge that I've cut to a small shape that I can use like the angles on to create facial hair or freckles with. And the shade that I've been using has been this gray tone. And that's specific for my skin color. I find that a grayish tone, grayish blue tone like that, creates a very believable, artificial, despite the fact it being artificial, I mean, um, 5 o'clock shadow or facial hair prominence, especially when it is picked up by your natural facial hair that you have on your face. It accentuates them, almost like tints them. Another thing you can do too is use Just for Men. I had some, but I think we're moving right now, which is why the house is a huge mess. Um, uh, but Just for Men to dye your eyebrow hairs, especially the ones that you find like scraggling around out here that are more blonde, and also your natural facial hair, your peach fuzz. Um, get the Just for Men that's for facial hair and eyebrows, and you can use that on your peach fuzz. And especially if you're on T, what hair does come out, especially if you find that your hair is growing in really light or almost like it feels like it's coming out like fishing line, like clear, um, just to make it a little bit more detectable without having to use cosmetics. But you would have to upkeep it. I would recommend probably doing it like maybe once every 2 weeks, once every week, depending on what kind of cleansers you use on the regular basis. If they tend to be more sudsy, obviously it's going to strip the color out faster. So that's another thing you can do, especially because you can just wake up and go and not have to worry about doing grooming. And again, this is more about grooming than it is about makeup because I'm not applying makeup to look pretty. I'm not applying makeup here to make me feel feminine. I'm only doing it in ways that are accentuating my masculine features. So it is a tool, it is not inherently feminine. Makeup does not have a gender. I like that. The gray is for transing your gender. It's my favorite eyeshadow color. If you want to, another thing you can do, by the way, is you can grab a setting spray to really lock this in, especially if you're outdoors, you're doing work. Um, you don't want anything sliding around on your face. You don't want to hug people and have like your eyebrow come off if you shave them off, like me, for example. So, using a setting spray at the end of everything is definitely something you can do. This one is going to make my face look a little bit shiny at first. This one size one, this is a little baby one. I do like it, but I wouldn't recommend it to people who are more trans masked because it does have a very floral scent when you go to apply it, even though it does waterproof your makeup. I would rather recommend you the Urban Decay All Nighter one instead because that one doesn't really have a detectable smell. The one from Charlotte Tilbury is also really nice. It's gonna be more of like skincare, like it has aloe in it, for example, and witch hazel to kind of like, especially if you have any like redness in your skin, things like that. Especially for those of you on testosterone, a lot of time, yeah, testosterone. Sorry, I can't speak right now. Um, it can kind of aggravate a lot of skin conditions at first. It can cause breakouts at first because a lot of times it's going to change the skin texture and the thickness even of your skin. Um, so you do tend to get a little bit of skin problems at first, especially when you first start tea. So I wouldn't really cover up too much your acne if you do get a couple breakouts here and there. Maybe just like a tinted moisturizer. That's all this little thing is, you know. And then contouring the rest. And fortunately, even though I have a breakout right here, The contour stick that I used is pigmented enough to kind of neutralize the red tones in that as well. Or you can even use, like the sunscreen I used. It has like a green color corrector added to it. You can kind of custom make your own too. You can mix your own moisturizer with like a green color corrector tone. Um, Mix them together and kind of just push it over your face too. NYX and ELF make really nice affordable ones um, that do the job really well. I do recommend actually there's a mattifying one from NYX, NYX, that um, I would recommend specifically for masculinizing because mattifying, again, like I powdered to kind of get rid of a little bit of the shine from my skincare. I didn't put any foundation or concealer on, but I still have a little bit of that shine from the sunscreen. All right, I've got a couple minutes left, but I hope this was really informative for a lot of you. Um, Definitely, like I said, in specifically the trans mask world, I've noticed that there are not a lot of resources out there when it comes to masculinizing your features with cosmetics in a way that is passing. You want it to look natural and not really detectable versus like drag king makeup, which is a performance of male gender, you know, which is meant to be more obvious, more detected, more of almost caricaturistic in some ways. So this is going to be more natural, more realistic, um, more for everyday passing, everyday applications and grooming versus um, specifically performance. If you did come in a little bit late, by the way, we should be recording this and streaming it as well to Twitch and YouTube. We will be having those archived, and once I have a link for those, I'll definitely post them in the Makeup with Sara class tab as well, as an easy link resource to go and revisit those videos. There already is one for feminizing makeup. Today's was for masculinizing makeup, and then next month we'll be having a class as well to be determined. So keep your eyes out for that as well. And we also want to do polls. So based off of your feedback and what you all want, that will be what I pursue next. So for example, like intro to foundation, like how to select foundations, what to look for in foundations, or even like intro to skincare or advanced skincare. Um, how to cover different things, like covering facial hair, for example. Um, Things like that could be entire classes, really. Yes, definitely foundation is definitely its own task. By the way, if you find yourselves having conversations in other threads or in other tabs, you feel free to at me or mention the hashtag makeup with Sara class as well. If you want me to kind of open up a dialogue or do some research regarding something for you, um, try it out. I have so many cosmetics and different ways to try things out, different recommendations for different price points, different regions. Um, so feel free to at me or DM me as well if you find yourselves having conversations regarding different things and you want another opinion if you'd like. I'm gonna have to wrap it up there though, everybody. But I hope you were able to learn um, especially filling in the blanks for a lot of the blanks that there are in the trans mass community with regards to male grooming or in being more non-conforming with how you apply your makeup as well. Definitely want to thank everybody for who tuned in as well. It really means a lot, and I hope I was able to make a difference definitely in how you perceive um, masculinizing makeup, especially. All right, everybody, I'm going to be signing off right now, but thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. All right.